The boy had been taught to count victories before he was taught to count anything else. His name was Tessin Oru, and he was 11 seasons old, and he sat in the high tally loft of the conquest ship Hand of Karsh, with a stylus in his small claw and a wall of glowing numbers in front of him. The numbers were the only thing that mattered in the whole of the unbroken tally, the empire that had eaten 1/4 of the visible sky, every world taken, every fleet broken, every surrender accepted. Each was a mark, and the marks ran down the wall in columns older than Tessin's grandmother, and the wall had never once held a loss. That was the whole of it. That was the empire. The Karsh did not pray. They did not dream. They counted. A culture 3,000 years old had reduced itself to a single sacred number, and the number was the count of times they had won, and it had never stopped climbing. There was a story the oldest keepers told, in the deep hours, about why the tally counted. Long ago, before the empire, the Karsh had been a small and frightened people on a hard world, hunted by larger things, and they had survived by one trick only, which was that they counted better than anything that hunted them. They counted the steps of the predator and knew when it would strike. They counted the seasons and knew when the cold would come. They counted, and they lived, and when at last they rose into the dark, they carried the counting with them, because counting was the thing that had kept them alive when they were small. And somewhere in 3,000 years, the trick that had saved them turned into the thing they worshipped, and the people who had once counted to survive began instead to survive only to count, and the wall of victories rose, mark by mark, until no Karsh living could remember that the count had ever been anything but the count. They had forgotten they were once the small and frightened thing. They had become the large thing that other small and frightened peoples counted, in the dark, to know when it would strike. The blue world had not forgotten. That was the thing none of them understood yet. The blue world had been small once too, and frightened too, and it had risen into the dark, carrying something other than a count, and it had remembered, the whole time, what it was like to be the thing that everyone closed and turned away from. Tessin's task that morning was to add the most recent victory to the wall. A gray-shelled people on a ringed world called Suan had thrown 40 ships at the tally's vanguard and been ground to dust in 19 minutes. Tessin keyed the mark. The great count rolled forward by one. It now stood at 11,406. 11,406 victories. No defeats. Not one, in 3,000 years. He looked at the number until his eyes watered, the way the old keepers had told him to. You were supposed to feel the weight of it. You were supposed to understand that you served the only thing in the galaxy that had never lost. Tessin had been chosen for the loft at 4 seasons old, the way every keeper was chosen, by a count. The masters had set 1,000 white stones before him, and 1,000 black, and asked him how many there were of each, and Tessin had answered without touching them, 1,000 and 1,000, and the masters had taken him from his clutch mother that same day. A keeper did not belong to a family. A keeper belonged to the wall. He learned the sacred script before he learned to feed himself. He learned the names of the 11,000 broken worlds the way other children learned songs, and there were no songs, because the Karsh did not sing, because a song is a thing you make when the count is not enough and you need something more, and the Karsh had decided 3,000 years ago that the count was always enough. There had been moments, in the long quiet hours of the loft, when Tessin had wondered what the worlds had looked like before they became marks. The gray shells of Suan, the ringed peoples who had thrown 40 ships and lasted 19 minutes. He had wondered, and then he had stopped wondering, because wondering was not counting, and a keeper who did not count was nothing at all. He had buried the wondering the way you bury a stone in deep water, and he had told himself it was gone. It was not gone. It was only waiting, the way the dark behind the blue world's sun was waiting, for the morning the count would finally break. A bell rang below, low and slow, the bell that meant a new world had been found at the edge of the surveyed dark. Tessin set down his stylus and went to the rail of the loft and looked down into the great war hall, where the High Reckoner Vasek Karsh stood over the map of stars. The High Reckoner was old. His shell had gone the gray of cold iron, and his eyes were the pale yellow of a long winter, and he had personally overseen 400 of the 11,000 victories on the wall. When he spoke, the war hall went silent, because his voice was the closest thing the Karsh had to a god. A world has answered our forward scouts. Vasek said. A small world. Blue. One sun. It calls itself by an old plain name. He touched the map, and the map drew the world for them all, turning slowly, blue and white and patient. It calls itself Earth, said the High Reckoner, and it has sent us a message. Tessin leaned over the rail. He had never seen the High Reckoner pause before a message. The Reckoner did not pause. He counted, and he moved, and the number climbed. But now the old gray commander stood very still, and read the message a second time, and something crossed his pale eyes that the boy in the loft had never seen there. The message was 4 words long. The translators rendered it into the Karsh tongue, and the words hung in the air of the war hall, plain and small, and without any threat in them at all. Please turn your fleet around. The war hall laughed. It was not a kind sound. The Karsh laughed the way an avalanche laughs, all at once and without mercy, and the laughter rolled up to the high loft and broke over Tessin like cold water. Please turn your fleet around. As if anyone had ever asked the unbroken tally to turn around. As if the word please had ever once worked in 3,000 years. The High Reckoner did not laugh. Tessin watched him, and the old commander's pale eyes stayed on the small blue world, and his claw did not move to add the request to any record. After a long moment, Vasek lifted one talon, and the laughter stopped, as if cut with a knife. Send the vanguard, the High Reckoner said. 400 ships, standard reduction. We do not turn around. There was a pause before the order went out, the smallest pause, and Tessin in the loft was perhaps the only one who saw it. The High Reckoner's claw hovered over the map a half-breath longer than it needed to, the way a keeper's stylus hovers over a column he is not sure of. Then it fell, and the order went, and whatever the old commander had felt in that half-breath, he folded away behind his pale winter eyes, and did not show again. Tessin did not understand it then. He would understand it only much later, when he was old himself, and had stood at the edge of his own decisions, and felt the same half-breath of doubt. The High Reckoner had read 3,000 worlds. He had learned to feel the difference between a world that begged and a world that warned, the way an old hunter learns the difference between a wounded thing and a thing pretending to be wounded. And something about the 4 small words from the blue world had set the old instinct ringing like a struck bell. Please turn your fleet around. Not spare us, not have mercy. Turn around. It was the phrasing a strong thing used with a weaker one, gently, to spare the weaker one the cost of finding out. And the High Reckoner had heard it, and had sent the vanguard anyway, because 3,000 years of an unbroken wall does not let even a god turn around on the strength of a half-breath. The order went out. The vanguard peeled away from the great tally fleet, 400 conquest ships sliding into the dark toward the small blue world, their hulls black, their counts proud, every one of them carrying keepers like Tessin who would add the victory to the wall when it was done. And Tessin, who was 11 seasons old, and had been taught to count victories before anything else, went back to his stylus, and prepared the new column, and wrote at the top of it the name of the world that had said please. He did not yet know that he was writing the first column the unbroken tally would never get to fill. He did not yet know that out beyond the blue world, past its single patient sun, in the cold and the dark where the Karsh scouts had not thought to look, something was already turning to face them. Not one ship, not a vanguard, not a flotilla. The whole of it. The full and gathered weight of a thing the galaxy had never bothered to count, because the galaxy had decided, 3,000 years ago, that the small blue world was not worth a mark on anyone's wall. The keepers of the tally were about to learn that you should count everything, even the things that say please. The vanguard reached the blue world in 2 days, and Tessin watched it on the loft screens the whole way, his stylus ready. 400 ships was not a large force by the standards of the tally. It was the number you sent to break a stubborn colony, a gray shell world, a people who had not yet learned the shape of the empire that had found them. 400 ships had ended 3,000 worlds. Tessin had counted some of those himself, in the year he had been allowed to keep the small marks, the worlds that died too fast to need an old keeper's hand. He expected this one to die fast too. The blue world had sent 4 words and a please. A please was a colony that did not understand yet. The tally would teach it. The vanguard slowed at the edge of the blue world's reach, and the keepers aboard each ship began their work, and the work was simple. You scanned the system. You counted what was there. You added it to the reckoning, and then you reduced it, and then you marked the victory. The Karsh had done it 11,000 times. The pattern never changed. But the count did not come back the way it always had. Tessin watched the numbers stream up from the vanguard, and at first, he did not understand what he was seeing, because the numbers were wrong. Not large, not small. Wrong in their shape. The scan of the Blue World's defense should have shown him a colony fleet, 40 ships, 100, the desperate scraping of a people about to lose. Instead, the scan showed him nothing in close orbit at all. The Blue World sat undefended, blue and white and turning, with a single patient sun, and not one warship near it. A keeper on the Vanguard flagship sent a note up the chain, and Tessin read it over the High Reckoner's shoulder screen. "The world is open," the note said. "No fleet, no guns. It asks again that we turn around." The Warhol laughed a second time, smaller now, because a laugh you have already laughed is not as sweet. The High Reckoner did not laugh. He stood over the map, and his pale eyes moved, slowly, out past the Blue World, into the dark behind it, where the scan showed nothing, and he said one word. "Where?" No one answered him. No one understood the question. The world was open. The Victory was 400 ships away from done. The High Reckoner asked where, and the Warhol did not know what he meant, and Tessin, watching from the loft, felt for the first time in his 11 seasons, a small, cold thing move in his chest. Because the only commander who had ever frightened him was now afraid of an empty patch of dark. "The world says turn around," said Vasek Karsh, very quietly, to no one and to everyone. "It does not say we will fight you. It does not say we will win. It says turn around. A thing that intends to die does not give you a direction. It begs. It does not steer." He touched the dark behind the Blue World. "Something is steering us," he said. "Find me what is behind that sun." The Vanguard pushed forward. 400 ships crossed the open space toward the open world, and the keepers readied their styluses, and the reduction began, the way it had begun 3,000 times. The lead ships opened fire on the Blue World cities, because that was the pattern, because a world that would not kneel was a world you taught. The shots never landed. Tessin saw it on the loft screens, and he would see it again, every night for the rest of his life. The light of the Vanguard's guns reached out toward the Blue World, toward the cities, toward the patient blue and white, and somewhere in the empty dark between the ships and the world, the light simply stopped. It did not scatter. It did not deflect. It stopped, all of it, 400 ships worth of fire, as if the dark had reached up a hand and closed it around the guns and held the light still in its fist. And out of that dark, where the scan had shown nothing, the Armada came. Not one ship. Not a Vanguard. The galaxy had a word for what the Karsh did, a word that meant a force sent to reduce a world, and the galaxy did not have a word for what rose out of the dark behind the Blue World's sun, because the galaxy had never needed one. They were gray, not black. They came in 3 great walls, and each wall was deeper than the tally's whole Vanguard, and behind the 3 walls there were more, ranked back into the dark farther than the loft screens could hold, and they did not hurry, and they did not boast, and they did not send a count. They simply arrived, wall behind wall, until the dark behind the Blue World's sun was no longer dark at all, but a moving gray country with a sun for a roof. A keeper on the Vanguard flagship found his voice, and sent one last note up the chain before the chain went quiet. Tessin read it on the High Reckoner's screen. He read it twice. Then he set down his stylus, because his claw had begun to shake. "It is the whole of them," the note said. "They did not send a fleet. They sent the Armada. All of it." The lead wall of the gray ships moved, and the 400 ships of the Karsh Vanguard, the standard reduction, the force that had ended 3,000 worlds, met the full and gathered weight of Earth's deep watch, and the meeting lasted 4 minutes. Tessin counted them. It was his task, and he could not stop himself. He watched the marks of the Vanguard wink out on the loft wall, 1, and then 10, and then 40 at a time, and his stylus moved without his wanting it to, subtracting where it had only ever added, and the great count on the wall that had only ever climbed began, for the first time in 3,000 years, to fall. It did not fall to 0. The Grey Armada did not erase the Vanguard. That was the thing Tessin would not understand for a long time, the thing that frightened him more than the dying would have. The Grey ships took the Vanguard's fire and held it still in the dark, and then they reached out, ship by ship, and they did not burn the Karsh hulls. They unmade their drives, they stilled their guns, they closed their fists around 400 conquest ships, the way the dark had closed around the light, gently and completely, and they held them, dead in space, blind and toothless and alive. Of 400 ships in the Vanguard, not one was destroyed. Every one was stopped. It was worse than dying. The Karsh did not have a column for it. There was no mark on the wall for a ship that had been allowed to live with its teeth taken out. Tessin's stylus hovered over the tally and did not know where to set down, because the only two things a keeper could write were victory and the absence of victory. And this was neither. This was a third thing, and the third thing had no name in 3,000 years of counting. The High Reckoner stood over the map of stars and watched 400 of his ships go still and silent and helpless, and he did not laugh, and he did not order a second wave, and for a long time he did not speak at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was very old. "They want us to count it," he said. He turned from the map, and his pale yellow eyes found the high loft, found the small keeper standing frozen at the rail, with a stylus shaking in his claw, and the whole war hall turned to follow the reckoner's gaze, until every eye in the great hall was on the boy. "Keeper," said Vasek Karsh. "Tessin Oru, come down." Tessin came down. His legs did not want to carry him, but a keeper did not refuse the High Reckoner, so he went down the long stair from the loft to the floor of the war hall, past the great wall of victories, 11,406, no defeats, and he stood before the oldest and most terrible commander in the visible sky, and the commander looked down at him. "You saw it," Vasek said. "What did they do?" Tessin's mouth was dry. "They stopped them," he said. "All of them. They did not kill them. They stopped them." "Why?" The boy did not know. He was 11 seasons old. He had been taught to count victories, and nothing else, and there was no count for this. He said the only true thing he had. "Because they wanted us to see," he said. "They wanted us to count it. The ones who were not killed." The High Reckoner looked at him for a long moment, and something in the old gray face that Tessin had no name for moved and settled. "Yes," said Vasek Karsh. "That is exactly what they wanted. And do you understand what it means, that they could kill 400 of my ships, and chose instead to take their teeth and leave them breathing? No, High Reckoner. It means," the old commander said, "that they are not afraid of us. A frightened enemy kills, a confident enemy spares, because a confident enemy is not trying to survive us. It is trying to teach us." He turned back to the map, to the 3 great walls of gray, the moving gray country, with a sun for a roof. "We have met 3,000 worlds that wish to live. This is the first that wishes us to learn." A second commander stepped forward from the ring around the map. He was younger than Vasek, his shell still dark, his eyes still bright, and his name was War Speaker Doran, and he had added 800 victories to the wall in 40 years, and he was hungry for more. He did not understand the old commander's stillness. He understood the wall. "Then we send the second wave," Doran said. "Not 400, 4,000. We have 11,000 victories, High Reckoner. We did not earn them by turning around when a world said please. We are the unbroken tally. We have never lost. We will not begin with a blue world that hides behind its sun." The war hall stirred. The hunger in Doran's voice was the old hunger, the one the Karsh were built on, and it ran through the hall like heat. "Send 4,000. Bury the gray wall under the weight of the count." The tally had never lost because the tally had always brought more, and more, and more, until the wall ran out of enemies. That was the whole of the strategy. That was the whole of the empire. The High Reckoner looked at the map, at the gray walls ranked back into the dark farther than the screens could hold. "How many of them are there, War Speaker?" he asked quietly. Doran did not know. None of them knew. The scan that had shown the blue world undefended had also shown the dark behind it empty, and the scan had been wrong both times, and now the gray walls ran back past the edge of every instrument the tally carried. "We will find out when we count their wreckage," Doran said. "You will not," said the High Reckoner. Because there will be no wreckage. They do not leave wreckage. They leave breathing ships with their teeth pulled, so that the breathing ships can carry the lesson home. You want to send 4,000. They will take the teeth out of 4,000 and send them back to us alive, and then we will have 4,400 ships in our fleet that have been touched by the gray and lived, and every keeper aboard every one of them will know that the wall lied. That is what the second wave buys you, War Speaker, not a victory. 4,000 witnesses. Doran did not flinch. Then they will be witnesses to a victory, he said. You speak as though the gray has already won, High Reckoner. It has stopped 400 ships. 400, out of a fleet that has broken 3,000 worlds. You are the oldest among us, and I honor you. But you are letting one strange trick frighten you into forgetting what we are. We have never lost because we have never blinked. The first time we blink, the wall is a lie, and every world we have ever spared the full weight of our hunger will hear that we blinked, and they will rise. We cannot afford the doubt you are carrying. We can only afford the wall. Send the 4,000. Let the gray take the teeth out of 400 more, if it can. Let the rest pour through and finish what the vanguard began. We do not need to break the gray. We need only to reach the blue world and burn one city, and the wall climbs again, and the doubt dies, and we are what we have always been. It was a good argument. Tessin, listening from beside the old commander, felt the weight of it, because it was the whole logic of the Empire spoken plainly, and the whole logic of the Empire was 3,000 years deep, and had never once been wrong. Reach the target, burn one thing. The wall climbs, the doubt dies. It had worked 11,000 times. There was no reason in the count for it to fail now. The High Reckoner looked at the War Speaker for a long moment, and his pale eyes were sad, in a way Tessin did not yet have the years to read. You are right about everything, except the one thing that matters, Doran, he said. You are right that we have never blinked. You are right that the wall is the whole of us. But you have not asked the question I have been asking since the 4 words arrived. The only question that has ever mattered, and that we have never once in 3,000 years had to ask. What if there is a thing in the dark that we cannot reach? Not a thing we choose not to break. A thing that will not let us through to break it. We have never met one. The wall is built entirely on the belief that no such thing exists. And I am standing here, War Speaker, watching 400 of my ships held still in a fist, made of nothing, and for the first time in 3,000 years, I am no longer certain that the belief is true. But Doran had the hall, and the hunger had the hall, and the wall of victories stood over all of them, 11,406, no defeats, and a number that large does not turn around for one old commander's caution. The War Speaker raised his claw and called the second wave, and the High Reckoner did not stop him, because even a god of counting cannot stop a number when it has decided to keep climbing. 4,000 ships peeled away from the great Tally fleet. They slid into the dark toward the blue world, toward the gray walls, toward the moving country with a sun for a roof, and the keepers aboard them readied their styluses, and Tessin watched from the floor of the war hall now, no longer in the high loft, standing small beside the oldest commander in the sky, and he felt the cold thing in his chest grow until it filled him. 4,000 was not 400. 4,000 was a number that had buried 1,000 worlds on its own. Surely, Tessin thought, surely even the gray could not stop 4,000. Surely the wall would climb again. Surely the empire that had never lost would not lose now, to a blue world that said please. The 4,000 reached the gray walls, and the gray walls opened. That was the part the keepers would argue about for the rest of their short careers, the part that broke them, the part Tessin would carry into his old age. The gray walls did not hold the line against the 4,000. They did not meet the charge wall to wall. They opened, like a door, like a mouth, like a hand uncurling, and they let the 4,000 Karsh ships pour through the gap into the space behind the 3 great walls, into the moving gray country. And Tessin watched 4,000 of the Tally's proudest hulls rush into the heart of the enemy, with their guns blazing, and their counts proud, and their styluses ready. And then the walls closed behind them. There was no flash, there was no fire, there was only the gray, all around the 4,000 now, before and behind, and above and below, and the light of the Karsh guns reaching out and stopping in the dark, every shot, All 4,000 ships worth, held still in a fist made of nothing. And then, ship by ship by ship, the Grey reached in and took the teeth out of all of them. It took 11 minutes. Tessin counted. He could not help it. And in those 11 minutes, the thing that broke Tessin was not the speed of it. It was the order of it. The Grey did not take the 4,000 in a wave, all at once, the way fire takes a forest. It took them in sequence, ship by ship by ship, from the outer edge of the captured fleet inward, and the sequence was perfect, and the sequence was patient, and the sequence never once hurried, even when a Karsh captain begged. Tessin watched the marks wink toward stillness in a slow tightening spiral, the way a keeper closes a ledger column from the bottom up, and he understood with a cold, clear horror that the Grey was counting too. It was counting the 4,000 as it stilled them. It was keeping its own tally, neat and exact and unhurried, and it had room in its tally for every single one, and it would not miss a single one, and it would not crush a single one, because crushing would have meant the count was off, and the count was never off. The Karsh had met many enemies in 3,000 years. They had met enemies who fought harder than the tally, enemies who were braver, enemies who were crueler. They had never once met an enemy who was more careful. And carefulness, Tessin understood in those 11 minutes, was the most terrifying thing a power could be, because a careful enemy was not trying to survive you, and was not trying to hurt you. A careful enemy had already decided exactly what it was going to do with you, down to the last ship, and was simply doing it, in order, without haste, the way you might sort stones. When it was over, 4,000 Karsh ships hung dead in space inside the Grey country, blind and toothless and alive, and not one of them had been destroyed, and the great count on the wall fell again, and fell, and the columns that had only ever climbed for 3,000 years ran down like water, and the war hall of the Hand of Karsh was utterly, perfectly silent. The High Reckoner Vasek Karsh looked at the map of stars, at the 4,000 stilled ships and the 400 before them, at the 3 great walls of Grey that ran back into the dark farther than any instrument could hold, and he closed his pale yellow eyes for one long moment. Then he opened them, and he looked down at the small keeper standing beside him, the boy who had been taught to count victories before anything else, and he said the most frightening thing Tessin Oru had ever heard. "Now," said the High Reckoner softly, "they will want to talk to us. And we are going to listen, because that, keeper, is the only column we have left to write in." The voice came to the Hand of Karsh on every channel at once, and it was a woman's voice, and it was calm. "This is Fleet Master Idris Calloway, of the Tide Entire of Earth's Deep Watch," the voice said. "I am speaking to the commander of the fleet that calls itself the Unbroken Tally. I know you can hear me. I know you have been counting. I would like you to keep counting, because I am about to give you some numbers, and I want you to write all of them down." Tessin stood at the rail of the high loft again, back at his wall, his stylus in his claw, and the whole war hall below had gone still to listen. The High Reckoner stood at the map and did not move. "You sent 400 ships," the woman's voice said. "We stopped 400 ships. You sent 4,000. We stopped 4,000. None of them are dead. I want you to understand that, because I think your empire does not have a way to understand it, and I am going to take some time to make sure you do. 4,400 of your ships are alive right now. Every crew, every keeper, every commander aboard them is breathing. We took out their drives and their guns and nothing else. You can have them back. We are not holding them. We are just holding their teeth." Down on the war hall floor, War Speaker Doran made a low sound, the sound of a hunter who has been made to look foolish, and the High Reckoner lifted one talon and the sound stopped. "You are wondering how," Calloway said. "I will tell you, because we are not hiding it. 3,000 years ago, your empire surveyed this region of the sky. Your scouts found a small blue world with a single sun, and they scanned it, and they counted it, and they wrote it down. I have the record. Your own keepers wrote it, and the words they wrote were these: one world. Pre-space flight. No fleet. No threat. Mark closed. Do not return." The High Reckoner went very still. "You closed us," the woman's voice said, and for the first time, there was something under the calm, something old and patient, and not quite warm. 3,000 years ago, You decided we were not worth a mark on your wall, and you turned your back, and you went and counted 11,000 other worlds. And we watched you do it. We watched you for 3,000 years. We read every broadcast you sent. We counted every world you took. We learned the shape of you, the way you learned the shape of 3,000 others, except that you never once thought to learn the shape of us, because you had already written us down and closed the page. Tesson's claw had gone cold around the stylus. He looked at the great wall of Victories, 11,000 and falling, and he thought of the small closed mark 3,000 years old, the one no keeper had ever read because the page was sealed, and a terrible understanding began to move in him. You count Victories, Calloway said. It is the only thing your empire is, so I am going to speak to you in the only language you have. Here is a number. We have 140 ships in the wall you can see, and we have 800 more in the walls you cannot see, and behind all of them we have the rest. And the rest is not a number I am going to give you, because the moment I give it to you, you will try to count it, and you will spend the next 1,000 years trying to bring more than it, and you will never be able to, and the trying will end your empire. So I am going to leave it uncounted. I am going to leave it as the one thing on your wall you will never get to write down. The war hall did not breathe. You have never lost, the woman's voice said. I know. I have read your wall. 11,406, and no defeats. And you think that makes you the only thing in the sky that has never lost. But you are wrong, and I am the one who gets to tell you. There is one other. We have been at war, in our quiet way, with the dark for longer than your empire has existed, and in all that time, we have never lost a world we chose to stand for. Not one. We do not write it on a wall, because a wall is a thing you build when you are afraid the count will stop. We just stand. And we have been standing in front of this small blue world that you closed 3,000 years ago, the entire time, waiting for you to come back and read the page. The High Reckoner Vasek Karsh stepped forward to the map, and he spoke for the first time, and his old voice carried to the woman across the dark. You have not lost, he said. I believe you, but you have not won, either. You have stopped 4,400 ships. We have 11,000 victories on our wall, and a fleet you cannot count. You have shown me you can hold my hand still. You have not shown me you can hold all of it. Why should I turn around? There was a pause, and Tesson held his breath, because he had heard the question under the question, and he knew the High Reckoner had asked the only thing that mattered. Show me you can win. Not stop. Win. Because High Reckoner, Calloway said, and now the calm in her voice had a floor under it, hard and final. I do not want to win. Listen to me, because no enemy has ever said this to you in 3,000 years, and you do not know how to hear it. I do not want to add you to a wall. I do not want your count. I want you to turn around and go home, and teach your empire to read the pages it has closed. That is the entire war I came to fight. I have the whole of my armada arrayed behind your fleet right now, every ship I have, and I could take the teeth out of all of it in an afternoon, the way I took them out of 4,400, and you would have 11,000 victories on a wall, and not one ship that could fly. But I am not going to do that, because a fleet full of toothless ships is not a lesson. It is just a graveyard that breathes, and I did not come 3,000 years for a graveyard. The High Reckoner was quiet for a moment, and then he asked the question that Tesson would remember as the moment the old commander stopped being a god and became something better, a creature that wanted to know. What is it you stand for? Vasek asked. You say you have never lost a world you chose to stand for. You say you have watched us for 3,000 years. You say you grew, in the dark we refuse to look at, into a fleet I cannot count. But you do not conquer. You do not count. You do not even name yourselves to the worlds you save, or they would speak of you. And in 3,000 years of surveying, I have never once heard a world speak of a gray fleet that watches. So what is it, Fleet Master? What does a power do with all that strength, if it does not build a wall? There was a long pause across the dark, and when Calloway answered, her voice had changed again, and Tesson could not name the change, but it was the sound a creature makes when it is asked, after a very long time, the one question it has been waiting for. We keep watch, she said. That is all. That is the whole of it, High Reckoner, and I know it will sound small to a people who measure themselves in broken worlds, but it is the largest thing I know how to do. There is a great deal of dark out here. Most of it is empty. Some of it is not. There are things in the deep that your survey closed and never returned to, the way you closed us. And not all of them say please. Some of them are patient, and some of them are hungry, and some of them have been growing in the unwatched dark far longer than your empire or mine. And we decided, a long time ago, on a small blue world, that the right thing to do with strength is not to count it on a wall, but to stand in front of the things that cannot stand for themselves, and to watch the dark your survey was too busy conquering to look at. You eat the sky 1/4 at a time and call it an empire. We watch the whole of it and call it a watch. That is the difference. That is the only difference, and it is everything. And we were one of the things you stand in front of, Vasek said slowly. The blue world. You have stood in front of it, for 3,000 years. Against what? Against you, when you finally came back, Calloway said, and against worse things than you, when they come, which they will. But mostly, High Reckoner, against the simplest thing of all. Against being forgotten, a world that everyone has closed and turned away from, is a world that anything can take in the dark, with no one to mark its passing. We stood in front of the blue world so that it would never be a thing that vanished unwatched. And while we stood there, we watched you, and we learned you, and we waited for the day your road would bend back to the page you closed. That day was today. We have been ready for it for 3,000 years. We were never in a hurry. We are a watch. A watch is never in a hurry. It is only, ever, awake. Tessin looked down from the loft at the back of the High Reckoner's old gray head, and then out at the map, and then he understood what the woman meant, and the understanding was so large it frightened him more than the dying would have. She had the whole fleet surrounded. Not the Vanguard, not the 4,000, the Hand of Karsh, the flagship, the great Tally fleet entire, every conquest ship the Empire had brought, 11,000 victories worth of hulls, all of it, ringed in the dark by walls of gray, that the scan still could not count. The blue world had not sent a force to meet the Vanguard. The blue world had let the Vanguard and the 4,000 come to it, had taken their teeth, and had spent the time it bought folding the rest of its armada around the entire unbroken Tally, so quietly that the keepers had not seen it happen. The empire that had never lost was inside the hand of the thing it had closed 3,000 years ago. Show him, said Fleetmaster Calloway, to someone Tessin could not see. And the gray came out of the dark on every side. It rose from beneath the Tally fleet, and above it, and before and behind, wall after wall after wall, gray ships ranked back into the dark, farther than the loft screens could hold in any direction, and Tessin turned and turned at the rail, trying to see the edge of it, and there was no edge. The map of stars in the war hall, the great map the High Reckoner had stood over for 40 years, went gray at every margin, and the small black marks that were the Tally fleet sat in the center of it, like a stone in a closed fist. The war hall made a sound it had never made in 3,000 years. It was not a laugh. War Speaker Doran, who had added 800 victories to the wall, who had called the second wave, stood at the map with his bright young eyes very wide, and made the sound, and the sound was the sound of a hunter who has just understood that he is the prey, and has been the prey the entire time, since before he was born, since the day 3,000 years ago when a tired scout wrote one world, no threat, mark closed, do not return. The High Reckoner Vasek Karsh did not make the sound. He stood at the gray map, and he was very old and very still, and after a long while he spoke, and his voice was steady. You could have done this the moment we arrived, he said. Yes, said Calloway. You let us send the Vanguard. You let us send the 4,000. You let us spend the ships, so that I would see you stop them and live, before you closed your hand. You wanted me to count the cost myself, so that when you finally showed me the fist, I would already know it was empty of malice. Yes, High Reckoner. You are teaching me, the old commander said slowly, the way I have spent 40 years teaching worlds, except that I taught with reduction, and you are teaching with mercy, and the mercy is the harder lesson, because reduction only proves you are stronger, and mercy proves you have already won, and chosen not to take it. He closed his pale yellow eyes. I have never been taught before. I did not know it would feel like this. Tessin, at the rail of the loft, felt something hot and strange behind his eyes, and he did not have a word for it, because keepers were not taught words for it. He looked at the Great Wall of Victories, 11,000 and falling, and for the first time in his 11 seasons, he understood that the wall had never been a record of strength. It had been a record of every world the tally had been too afraid to spare. 11,406 times, the Empire had met something it could have turned around for, and had counted it instead, because counting was easier than turning around. And out beyond the blue world, the thing the Empire had closed 3,000 years ago had grown, patient and quiet and unwritten, into a wall of gray with no edge, and had waited, and had not added a single mark to any wall, because it was not afraid the count would stop. "There is one more thing," said Fleet Master Calloway, "that I want your young keeper to hear. The one in the high loft, the one who has been counting all of this." The whole war hall turned, and looked up, and Tessin Oru stood frozen at the rail, with his stylus in his claw, and the oldest woman's voice he had ever heard came to him alone, gentle now, across the whole of the gray dark. "I know you are up there, Keeper," she said. "I know they teach you to count victories before anything else. I want you to do something for me. I want you to look at your wall, and I want you to find the column you started this morning, the one with the name of our world at the top. And I want you to keep it, do not erase it, do not close it. Leave it open, and at the top of it, under the name of our world, I want you to write one word, and I want it to be the first word in 3,000 years that your empire wrote without counting first." Tessin's claw moved to the wall. He found the column. He found the name of the blue world at the top of it, the name he had written that morning when he thought he was beginning a victory. "Write, please," said Fleet Master Idris Calloway, "and then turn your fleet around, and go home, and teach your empire to read it." War Speaker Doran would not let it end there. He stepped to the center of the gray map, and his bright young eyes were wild now, and he turned to the High Reckoner, and his voice cracked across the silent war hall like a whip. "You will not do this," Doran said. "You will not turn the unbroken tally around, because a blue world told a child to write, please. 3,000 years, High Reckoner. 11,000 victories. I added 800 of them with these claws, and you would throw it all away, because one fleet learned a trick of holding light still in the dark? They have not killed a single ship, not one. A force that cannot kill, cannot conquer. They are bluffing. They have shown us their whole strength, and it is a strength that pulls teeth and gives them back. That is not a fleet, that is a nurse." He turned to the hall, to the keepers and the commanders, to the hunger that had built the empire. "I will not turn around. Give me 1,000 ships and let me cut a hole in the gray, and I will show you that mercy is just weakness that has learned to make a speech." The hall stirred. The hunger was still there, under the fear, and a number 11,000 large does not die in an hour. Some of the commanders moved toward Doran. Tessin, at the rail, felt the war hall tilt, felt 3,000 years of momentum lean toward the war speaker's wild bright eyes, and he understood that the lesson had not landed, that the empire was about to reach for the only thing it knew, more, and more, and more. The High Reckoner Vasek Karsh raised one talon, and the hall did not stop. For the first time in 40 years, the war hall of the Hand of Karsh did not obey the lift of its commander's claw. And then Fleet Master Calloway spoke again, and her voice was no longer calm. "War Speaker Doran," she said, "I can hear you. I can hear all of you. You think because we have not killed, we cannot. You think mercy is weakness with a speech. I was hoping I would not have to answer that, because the answer costs me something I do not like to spend. But your young keeper is watching, and the worlds you have not reached yet are watching, and I will not let a hall full of frightened hunters walk out of here believing that the only reason we did not burn you is that we could not." The gray map in the war hall changed. Far out, at the very edge of the gray country, past the walls, past the place where the tally fleet sat ringed in the closed fist, a single point on the map went white. Not gray, white, and hard, and bright as the blue world's sun. "There is a dead star at the margin of this system," Calloway said. "Your own charts have it. A burnt-out thing, cold for 1 billion years, no use to anyone, the kind of thing your survey would close and never return to. Watch it. I am going to spend one shot. Not on you, on nothing. On a dead rock at the edge of the map, where it can hurt no one and teach everyone. And then you are going to understand exactly what we chose not to do to your 4,400 ships. and you are going to spend the rest of your lives grateful that we are the kind of fleet that pulls teeth instead. The flagship of Earth's Deep Watch, the ship the woman commanded, the one the gray walls ranked back from like soldiers around a queen, turned its face toward the dead star at the margin of the map. The loft screens caught it, and Tessin saw it for the first time clearly, and it was not large. That was the thing he could not forget afterward. It was not the largest ship in the gray wall. It was gray like all the rest, plain and patient and unboastful, and it had a name on its hull in the human tongue that the translators rendered into Karsh, and the name was Long Account. The Long Account fired one shot. Tessin did not see the shot. No one saw the shot. There was only the dead star at the margin of the map, cold for 1 billion years, and then there was not. The white point on the map flared and grew, and the dead star came apart, not in fire, but in a silence that the instruments could not hold, the whole burnt-out billion-year corpse of it, folding inward and then outward in a single soundless breath, until where the dead star had been, there was a ring of cold light spreading across the dark, and then nothing, and then the dark again, and the margin of the map was empty where a star had been. One shot, one ship, one dead star unmade. The war hall was silent in a way that Tessin had not known silence could be. It was the silence of 3,000 years ending. War Speaker Doran stood at the center of the gray map, with his bright young eyes fixed on the place where the dead star had been, and his claws had gone slack at his sides, and he did not say anything at all, because there was nothing in 11,000 victories that had prepared him to say it. "That is one shot," said Fleetmaster Calloway quietly, "from one ship, the smallest in the wall you can see. Now look at your map, War Speaker, and count the ships in the gray, and multiply, and understand that I let 4,400 of your hulls live, when I could have made every one of them a ring of cold light in an afternoon. I did not do it because I cannot. I did not do it because I will not. There is a difference, and your empire has spent 3,000 years pretending there is not, and that pretending is the disease I came to cure." She let the silence hold for a long moment, and in that silence, far down the length of the tally fleet, where the High Reckoner's word reached slowest and the hunger reached fastest, one ship did not wait. Her name was the Iron Reckoning, and she was a flank cruiser of the old line, and her sub-commander was a Karsh named Halvek, who had not stood in the war hall, and had not felt the fist close, and had not seen the half-breath of doubt cross the old commander's eyes. Halvek had heard only the woman's words, "Take the teeth out, give them back, turn around," and to Halvek, those words were not mercy. They were insult. 3,000 years of an unbroken wall and a blue world that the survey had closed was telling the unbroken tally to turn around and go home and learn to read. Halvek had 200 victories of his own. He had a crew that had never seen the Iron Reckoning's guns fail to land, and he had decided, in the long silence after the dead star died, that he would not be lectured by a fleet that had not killed a single ship. The Iron Reckoning broke ranks. She drove hard for the nearest gray wall, all her guns awake, and she did not aim for the wall itself. She aimed for the gap behind it, the lane the woman had opened for the road home, and her plan was simple and old and Karsh to the bone. Punch through the open road, get behind the gray, find the blue world undefended, the way the scan had shown it, and burn one city, just one, to prove that the gray could be passed, and the world could be touched, and the tally was not beaten, while one of its ships could still reach a target. One city, one mark, one proof that the wall had not fallen. Tessin saw the Iron Reckoning break, and his claw went cold, because he understood at once what Halvek meant to do, and he understood that if the gray burned the Iron Reckoning for it, the lesson would die. The whole hall would say, "There, you see, they will kill when they are pushed, they are only stronger, not better," and the half-breath of doubt in the old commander's eyes would close, and the count would begin again. Tessin did not have a word for what he felt watching the flank cruiser drive for the gap. It was not fear for the Iron Reckoning. It was fear for the lesson. He had never in his 11 seasons feared for anything but the count, and now he stood at the rail and feared that 200 proud guns were about to undo the one true thing that had ever happened in the war hall, and he did not know which side he was afraid for, and that not knowing was the strangest feeling he had ever held. The Iron Reckoning reached the gap in the gray wall at full burn, guns blazing, and the gray did not burn her. The gray closed the gap. It was the gentlest thing Tessin ever saw, and the most final. The lane that the woman had opened for the road home simply was not there anymore. The gray ships on either side did not fire. They did not ram. They slid together, smooth and slow and certain, and where there had been an open road, there was a wall, and the iron reckoning, driving at full burn for a gap that had closed in front of her, did not crash into it, because the gray would not even allow her that. Her drives went still in the same breath the gap closed. Her guns went quiet. Her 200 proud guns, that had never failed to land, reached out into the dark and found their light held still in the same closed fist that had held 4,400 before her, and the iron reckoning drifted to a stop one ship's length from the gray wall, dead in space, blind and toothless, and entirely, perfectly alive. The gray had answered a charge with a closed door and a held breath, and had not so much as scratched her hull. Sub-Commander Halvek's voice came up the chain to the war hall, and it was not the voice of a hunter anymore. It was the voice of a creature who has thrown the hardest thing he had at a wall, and watched the wall decide, with the ease of a parent catching a falling child, not to let him hurt himself. It was the voice of 3,000 years cracking. Halvek did not curse. He did not rage. He said one thing, very quietly, and the whole fleet heard it. "It did not even fight me," Halvek said. "I gave it everything I had, and it would not even fight me. It just would not let me through." The High Reckoner Vasek Karsh closed his pale eyes, and when he opened them, the half-breath of doubt was gone, and in its place was the thing Tessin would later learn to call certainty, of a new kind. "No, Halvek," the old commander said into the chain, gently, so that the whole fleet could hear. "It would not fight you, because there was nothing in you worth fighting. You are not its enemy. You never were. Its enemy is the part of us that thinks a closed door is an insult instead of a kindness. It just put that part of you to sleep, the way it put 4,400 others to sleep, and it gave you back your hull and your crew and your 200 victories, and it is waiting, right now, for you to understand that you are still alive, only because it chose, with the door already closing, to catch you, instead of letting you break." Fleetmaster Calloway spoke again across the dark, and the floor was still under her voice. "I do not write victories on a wall," she said, "because I am not afraid the count will stop. I am afraid of the day I have to fire that shot at something that is not a dead star. I have fired it before. I will fire it again, when the dark gives me no other road. But I have never once fired it at a fleet that I could turn around with a word, and I am not going to start with yours. So turn around, High Reckoner, not because you are beaten, because you have finally met the only thing larger than your wall, and it has chosen, with the whole of its strength arrayed around your throat, to let you live and learn, instead of die and be counted." The High Reckoner Vasek Karsh stood at the gray map for a long, long time. Then he turned, slowly, his old gray shell catching the light, and he looked at War Speaker Doran, and his pale yellow eyes were not angry. They were something Tessin had never seen in them, and would not have a word for until he was very old, and the word was free. "Lower your claw, War Speaker," the High Reckoner said gently. "We have lost. For the first time in 3,000 years, the unbroken tally has lost, and I have spent 40 years afraid of this hour. And now that it is here, I find that it does not feel the way I feared. It feels like the first morning I have ever woken without the wall standing over me. Lower your claw. The count is over. It was always going to be over. The only thing we ever chose was whether we would be breathing when it ended. And this fleet, this blue world we closed 3,000 years ago, has chosen for us, and chosen mercy, and I am too old and too tired to pretend that I am sorry." Doran's claws shook. The hunger fought in him, the whole weight of 3,000 years, 800 victories that were his own, the only thing he had ever been. And then his eyes moved, once more, to the place on the map where the dead star had been, the empty margin, the ring of cold light fading into the dark, and the hunger went out of him all at once, the way a fire goes out when the air is taken, and he lowered his claw. "It does not feel like losing," Doran said, very quietly, almost to himself. "I thought losing would feel like dying. It feels like being put down, like setting down a stone I have carried so long I forgot it was heavy." "Yes," said the High Reckoner, "that is exactly what it feels like. Remember it. You will need to explain it to the ones who were not in this hall." He turned then, the oldest and most terrible commander in the visible sky, and he looked up at the high loft, at the small keeper standing frozen at the rail, with his stylus in his claw, and the great wall of Victories falling behind him, and he spoke to the boy in front of the whole war hall. "Tessin Oru," said Vasek Karsh, "you have a column open with our enemy's world at the top of it. Write the word she asked for. Write it where every keeper who comes after you will read it. And then begin a new wall, keeper. A wall the unbroken tally has never kept in 3,000 years. And at the top of the new wall write the thing we are going to count from now on, instead of victories." "What are we going to count, High Reckoner?" Tessin asked. His voice was very small in the great hall. The old commander looked at him, and the freedom in his pale eyes was terrible and gentle at once. "The worlds we turned around for," said Vasek Karsh. "The pages we opened instead of closing. We have 11,000 victories on the old wall, keeper, and not one of them ever made us anything but afraid. Let us see what kind of empire we become when we start counting the times we chose to let something live." Tessin Oru turned to the great wall of victories. 11,406. No defeats. 3,000 years of a count that had only ever climbed and had fallen. Today, for the first and only time. He found the column he had begun that morning, the one with the name of the blue world at the top, the one he had thought would be a victory. He lifted his stylus. And under the name of the world that had said please, in the old sacred script that keepers used for the marks that mattered most, the boy who had been taught to count victories before anything else, wrote the first word the unbroken tally had ever written without counting first. He wrote please. Out beyond the blue world, the gray walls began, very slowly, to part. Not to attack, to open a road. A clear lane through the closed fist, back the way the tally fleet had come, out of the gray country, and into the open dark, toward home. The full armada of Earth's deep watch, every ship of it, the uncounted weight that had ringed the Empire's throat for an afternoon, drew back and held the road open and did not fire, and did not boast, and did not add a single mark to any wall, and waited for the unbroken tally to turn around. And the High Reckoner Vasek Karsh gave the order that no commander of the Karsh had given in 3,000 years. "Turn us around," he said. "All of us. We are going home." The turning of the unbroken tally took 6 hours, and Tessin Oru watched all of it from the high loft, and he did not count a single thing. That was the strangest part. For 11 seasons his claw had moved on its own, marking, tallying, subtracting, the way another creature breathes. And now, as the great fleet came about in the open road the gray had left for it, as 11,000 victories worth of black hulls turned their faces from the blue world and toward home, Tessin found that his stylus lay still in his claw, and he did not pick it up, and the wall of falling numbers behind him no longer pulled at his eyes. He just watched. He watched the gray walls hold the road open. He watched the smallest ship in the wall, the one called Long Account, sit quiet at the margin near the place where the dead star had been, and not move, and not boast. When the last of the tally fleet had come about, the woman's voice came one final time, on every channel, calm again now, the floor back under it. "High Reckoner," said Fleet Master Idris Calloway. "Your 4,400 ships are getting their teeth back. We are returning their drives and their guns as they pass us on the road. We never wanted them. I told you we were only holding them, not keeping them. By the time your fleet reaches the open dark, every ship will fly and fight again exactly as it did. We have changed nothing about your strength. We have only changed what you know about ours." The High Reckoner stood at the gray map and inclined his old gray head, a gesture the Karsh did not have, a gesture he made anyway. "You could have kept them," Vasek said. "You could have kept all of it. You held my throat in your hand for an afternoon. Why give it back?" "Because a lesson you teach by taking is forgotten the moment the student gets strong again," Calloway said. "And a lesson you teach by giving back is carried forever. I do not want you weak, High Reckoner. A weak empire learns nothing but hunger for the day it is strong again. I want you exactly as strong as you were this morning, and changed in the only place that matters, which is the place behind your eyes, where you decided 3,000 years ago that the only safe sky is a sky you have counted to the edge of. I am sending you home with all your teeth, so that every day for the rest of your empire's life, You will choose, freely, with the full weight of your strength in your claws, not to close a single page you have not read. There was a pause, and then the woman's voice softened, just slightly, the way Tessin had heard it soften only once before, when she had spoken to him. There is a thing your empire never understood about us, she said. You think we are stronger than you. We are not. We are older at one thing, and one thing only. We learned, a very long time ago, on the small blue world you closed, that strength is not the count of what you have broken. Strength is the size of the thing you can break and choose not to. You have 11,000 victories because you broke 11,000 worlds that you could break. We have one blue world and a fleet you cannot count. And in all our long history we have never once broken a thing we could have turned around for. That is the whole difference. That is the entire war. You measured yourselves by what you destroyed. We measure ourselves by what we spared. And today you learned, in a single afternoon, which of those two empires the dark is actually afraid of. The road through the gray held open. The unbroken tally moved down it, ship by ship by ship, out of the closed fist, into the open dark. And as each of the 4,400 stilled ships passed the margin where the long account sat quiet, its drives woke, and its guns woke, and it flew on toward home under its own power, whole, alive, with all its teeth and nothing taken but its certainty. On one of those 4,400 ships, a young keeper named Vess sat in a loft much like Tessin's, and she had spent the 11 minutes of the stilling certain she was about to die, and she had not died. And now she sat in front of her own falling wall and could not make her claw move. Vess had been aboard the 4,000. She had felt the gray close around her ship, had felt the drives go quiet and the guns go cold, had waited in the dark for the fire that would end her, and the fire had not come. Instead, the dark had simply held her, gently, for an hour, the way you might hold a frightened thing still until it stopped struggling. And then, as her ship passed the margin, her drives had woken under her, and her guns, and a voice she did not know had come once, quietly, on her ship's own channel, not a threat, and not a boast. Go home, the voice had said. Tell them what it felt like to be caught. Vess never forgot it. None of the 4,400 ever forgot it. That was the thing the High Reckoner had understood, and War Speaker Doran had not, in the first hour of the war hall. You can break a fleet and the survivors will tell of fire and call you strong. But you cannot uncatch a creature you have caught gently. 4,400 keepers flew home that day, with the memory of the closed fist that had chosen not to crush them, and not one of them would ever again be able to add a victory to a wall, without remembering the afternoon a blue world held them still and let them go. The lesson was not in the long account. The lesson was in them. It rode home in 4,400 lofts, and it would spread to every world the tally touched from that day forward, because a thing that has been caught gently cannot help but tell the story. Tessin watched the High Reckoner's flagship pass the margin last of all. He watched the small gray ship called Long Account sit there in the dark, as the hand of Karsh slid by, the oldest and most terrible warship of the Empire passing within reach of the smallest ship in the wall that had wringed its throat, and neither one fired, and neither one boasted, and the only thing that passed between them was the open road. And then the gray was behind them, and the blue world was behind them, and the single patient sun was behind them, and the unbroken tally of Karsh was going home for the first time in 3,000 years, without a victory to write on the wall. The boy in the high loft stood at the rail, a long time after the blue world had shrunk to a point and gone out. The great war hall below had emptied. The commanders had gone to their stations to begin the long, slow work of explaining, to 1,000 worlds and 10,000 keepers, what had happened in the dark behind a sun that the survey had closed 3,000 years ago. War Speaker Doran had gone with them, his bright young eyes quieter now, carrying the weight of a thing he would spend the rest of his life trying to put into words for those who had not stood in the hall and felt the fist close. Only the High Reckoner remained, old and gray at the dark map, and Tessin, small at the rail above him. After a long while the boy came down the long stair, past the great wall of victories, 11,406, no defeats, the count that had fallen today and would never be added to again. He stood beside the oldest commander in the visible sky, and the two of them looked at the wall together, the god of counting, and the boy he had taught to count. It will frighten them, Tessin said quietly. The Keepers, when they learn the wall has a defeat on it now. 3,000 years, and no defeats, and now one. It will frighten them. Yes, said Vasek Karsh. It should. A thing that has never been frightened has never been wise. We were the most powerful empire in the visible sky, Keeper, and we were never once wise, because we were never once afraid, because we never once met a thing larger than our wall. Today we met it. Let them be frightened. Fear is the first thing a counting people feels on the morning they finally learn to look up from the count. Tessin was quiet a moment, and then he asked the thing that had been turning in him since the gray first rose out of the dark. High Reckoner, he said, why did they not just tell us? 3,000 years. They watched us break 11,000 worlds. They had the strength to stop us from the very first one. Why did they let us count so long, if they were going to come at the end and take it all away? The old commander did not answer at once. He looked at the wall, at the 11,406 names, the long climbing columns, 3,000 years of his people's whole soul, written in the sacred script. And when he spoke, there was something in his voice that Tessin had never heard from him, a thing the Karsh did not keep on any wall, and had no script for, and the thing was grief. Because they could not, Vasek said quietly. Not the way you mean. Think on it, Keeper. If the Grey Fleet had risen 3,000 years ago, at the first world we touched, and stopped us, what would we have learned? Nothing. We would have learned only that there was a stronger thing in the dark, and we would have spent 3,000 years building toward the day we could break it, the way we have spent 3,000 years building toward everything. A lesson taught too early is not a lesson. It is only a wall you have not yet climbed. The Grey had to wait, Keeper. It had to let us grow as large and as proud and as certain as we could possibly grow, until our wall was so tall that nothing in the sky could be larger, and then, only then, it could show us a thing larger still, and we would have no answer, because we would have already spent everything we had on being the largest. They did not let us count for 3,000 years to take it away at the end. They let us count for 3,000 years so that when they finally stood in front of us, we would be standing at the very top of everything we could ever be, and we would still have to look up. There is no other place to teach a power like ours. You cannot teach a thing humility while it still has somewhere left to climb. Tessin felt the cold thing in his chest, the one that had been there since the Grey first rose, and he understood that it had never been fear of the Grey at all. It had been the beginning of the grief the old commander carried, the grief of a people who had spent 3,000 years climbing to the only height from which the lesson could be seen. It is a kindness, then, Tessin said slowly. The waiting. It is a cruel kindness, but it is a kindness. It is the only kindness large enough for a thing like us, said Vasek Karsh, and you will spend your whole life, Keeper, trying to be worthy of having received it. As will I. As will every Karsh who comes after. That is what they gave us today. Not a defeat, a debt. The debt of having been taught by something that did not have to teach us, and chose to, and waited 3,000 years to do it gently. We will be paying that debt forward to smaller and weaker things for the rest of our empire's life, and the paying of it is the best thing we will ever do. Tessin looked at the wall, at the long columns climbing back 3,000 years, and then at the single open column at the bottom, the one with the name of the blue world at the top, and the one word he had written under it in the old sacred script. Please. They will ask me what it means, he said. The young Keepers. When they are old enough to read the wall, they will find the defeat, and they will find that word, and they will ask me what it means. The High Reckoner looked down at the boy, and the freedom was still in his pale yellow eyes, and the gentleness, and under both of them, something that Tessin would only later understand, was hope, a thing the Karsh had never kept on any wall. Then you will tell them the truth, said Vasek Karsh. You will tell them that 3,000 years ago, our empire found a small blue world with one sun, and we counted it, and we closed it, and we wrote, "Do not return," and we turned our backs, because we thought we already knew everything that was worth knowing about it. And you will tell them that the small blue world spent 3,000 years growing, in the dark we refused to look at, into a fleet that could have unmade us in an afternoon. And you will tell them that when our whole proud empire finally came back to that world, with 11,000 victories at our backs, the world did not destroy us. It held our throat in its hand, gently, with all of its strength, and it asked us to please turn around and go home, and learn to read the pages we had closed. And then it gave us back our teeth, and opened a road, and let us go. He set one old talon, very lightly, on the small keeper's shoulder. And you will tell them that on that day, keeper, the unbroken tally lost for the first time in 3,000 years, and it was the best thing that ever happened to us, because losing to mercy is the only kind of losing that teaches you how to be something better than what you were. You will tell them that strength is not the count of what you have broken. It is the size of the thing you can break and choose not to. And then you will point at the word I told you to write, and you will tell them that it is the most important word on the entire wall, more important than all 11,000 victories above it, because it is the only word we ever wrote without counting first. Tessin Oru looked up at the oldest commander in the visible sky, and then at the Great Wall, 11,000 victories and 1 defeat, and 1 open word, and he understood, at 11 seasons old, that he had been given the only column that would ever matter, and that he would spend the rest of his long life keeping it. He did keep it. That is the part the keepers tell now, the ones who came long after, when they teach the young the new script. Tessin Oru lived a long time, longer than the High Reckoner, longer than Warspeaker Doran, longer than every commander who had stood in the war hall the day the count broke. And in all his long life he never added a single mark to the old wall of victories. It stood where it had always stood, 11,406 and 1 defeat, and the keepers kept it clean and read its names, but they did not add to it, because there was nothing left to add. The unbroken tally had stopped breaking worlds. The new wall Tessin began was a strange thing at first, and the old commanders did not know what to make of it. At the top, in the sacred script, under the word the boy had written without counting, Tessin had carved the thing the High Reckoner told him to count. The worlds we turned around for, and for a long time the new wall was nearly empty, because turning around did not come easily to a people 3,000 years in the habit of reduction, and the first marks went up slowly, 1 and 1 and 1. A gray shell colony spared, a ringed world passed by, a fleet that flew out to meet the tally, and was allowed, simply, to go home. But the new wall filled, that was the thing. Slowly, over the long years of Tessin's keeping, the new wall filled, mark by mark by mark, and somewhere in those years, it passed the moment when the Karsh stopped thinking of the marks as failures, and began to think of them as the only victories that had ever been worth keeping. By the time Tessin was old, the new wall ran longer than the old one, and the young keepers learned its names the way Tessin had once learned the names of broken worlds, except that these names were not the names of the dead, they were the names of the living. They were the worlds that still turned under their suns, because the unbroken tally had finally learned to read a page before it closed it. And every young keeper, when they were old enough, was brought to the foot of the old wall, to the single open column with the name of a blue world at the top, and 1 word carved beneath it, and an old keeper would tell them the story, and at the end, the old keeper would say the thing Vasek Karsh had said to Tessin, that this was the most important word on the entire wall, more important than all 11,000 victories above it, because it was the only word the Empire had ever written without counting first. And the young keeper would look at it, and not understand, the way Tessin had not understood, and the old keeper would smile the strange new smile the Karsh had learned, and say, "You will understand when you have had to turn around." And the young keeper always did. Far behind them now, fading in the dark, the small blue world turned slowly under its single patient sun, undefended, open, with no fleet in close orbit, and no guns pointed outward, exactly as the survey had recorded it 3,000 years ago. 1 world, no threat, and out past it, where the scan had always shown nothing, where the survey had never thought to look, the full armada of Earth's deep watch drew quietly back into the cold and the dark, every ship of it, the uncounted weight that had ringed an empire's throat, and chosen, with its hand already closed, to open and let go. They did not follow the tally home. They did not need to. The lesson was aboard the tally now, riding in the high loft of the hand of Karsh, in the claw of a boy who had stopped counting victories, and it would carry itself the rest of the way. That was the deepest thing the watch understood, the thing that made it older than the tally, at the one thing that mattered. A conqueror has to stay, because the moment a conqueror leaves, The conquered begin to forget the fear, and the wall has to be rebuilt, world by world, forever. But a teacher can leave. A teacher can turn its back on the very morning of the lesson and trust the lesson to do its own slow work. Because a thing that has been truly taught does not need the teacher standing over it. The tally had spent 3,000 years unable to leave a single world it had touched, garrisoning the dark, counting and recounting, because fear is a thing you have to keep refreshing or it fades. The watch left the moment the road was open, and it left without a backward glance, because mercy, understood, is the one lesson that teaches itself forward forever, passing from the caught to the children of the caught, down all the years, long after the gray ships that taught it have gone back into the dark and been forgotten by everyone but the keepers of a single open word. Fleetmaster Idris Calloway stood on the bridge of the long account and watched the last black hull of the unbroken tally shrink to a point and go out, and she did not write the day on any wall, because she was not afraid the count would stop. She had what she had come 3,000 years for. Not a victory, not a count. A page that had been closed for 3,000 years, opened at last, by the empire that had closed it, freely, with all its teeth in its claws. Around her, on the bridge of the smallest ship in the wall, the crew of the long account went quietly back to the work of the watch. No one cheered. That was a thing the Karsh would never have believed, if they could have seen it. The fleet that had wringed an empire's throat and turned it home without firing a shot in anger did not celebrate, because there was nothing to celebrate. A watch does not celebrate the dawn it kept. It only notes that the dawn came, and turns its eyes back to the dark, and waits for the next thing that might need standing in front of. The crew logged the day in the plainest words. Tally fleet contacted. Tally fleet turned. No losses, theirs or ours. Page opened. Watch resumes. And then they went back to watching, because the dark was very large, and most of it was empty, and some of it was not, and the not empty parts did not wait for anyone to be ready. Calloway thought, as she always did at the end of a long watch kept, of the small blue world behind her, and of all the people on it who would never know what had happened in the dark that day, who had gone about their small bright lives, never once aware that an empire that had broken 11,000 worlds had come for theirs and been turned away with a word. That was the whole point of the watch, she thought, not to be thanked, not to be feared, not even to be known, only to make certain that the small bright lives stayed small and bright, and went on, undefended and unafraid, exactly as the survey had once written them down. One world, no threat. The Karsh had meant it as a dismissal. The watch had spent 3,000 years making it a promise. She gave one quiet order, and the full armada of Earth's deep watch turned its gray face back toward the small blue world it had stood in front of since before the tally was an empire, and it took up its long, patient watch again, in the cold and the dark the galaxy had never bothered to count. And on the wall of the hand of Karsh, growing smaller in the distance, under the name of a blue world, and the one word a boy had written without counting first, the longest war in the visible sky ended the only way the dark had ever truly feared it would. Not with a fleet broken, with an empire taught.